is handling food waste, organic waste reduction, diversion, and rescue efforts in Maryland. My name is Margaret Todd. I usually go by Megan, if anybody in the audience recognizes me. I'm a legal research associate with the Agricultural Education Initiative, and I'll be moderating today's last panel. Before we get started, I wanted to give you all just a few numbers so that you get a sense for the enormity of the issue of food waste at a national scale. And I'm really glad that we went after the Farm Bill discussion, actually, because it kind of sets it up a little bit in terms of their discussion for food insecurity and the need to produce more food just globally and nationally. But we also need to think about the flip side of that coin, which is reducing the food waste that we already have. So according to the EPA, about a third of the total amount of food that's prepared for human consumption actually ends up being wasted. And I like to visualize things. And so I like to go, say you go to a grocery store or a restaurant and you go into the walk-in freezer. Imagine a third of all the food that's in that store is actually going to go to waste, right? And then you think about the number of stores and restaurants we have in every city and every state across the country. That's a massive amount of food every year being wasted. And not just the food itself, but all the inputs that go into producing that food, from the water, the fertilizer, the fuel that's used to transport, package, and store. Of course, we know those inputs create greenhouse gases, which have clear connections and implications for climate change. But we also talk about the land use implications of all that food waste. We have, the EPA has an estimate that roughly 23% of our total wasted material, like all of the trash that we generate in the US, is going to either a landfill or an incinerator. So that food that's decomposing in those landfills is also, creating methane, another very strong greenhouse gas that's contributing to the environmental and public health crisis of climate change. And then on top of that, of course, we know we have food insecurity issues, and reducing food waste can help significantly address issues of food system resiliency and local supply chains. So this has been a known issue for decades, and there have been efforts for decades, yet this panel is still very timely because we are talking about another recently passed Maryland law, and that's HB 264, organic recycling and waste diversions for food residuals today. And we have two of the best people in the state that we can learn about this topic from today, Shannon McDonald and Tim Kerr, who are natural resource planners with the Maryland Department of Environment and have been key in driving forces behind drafting the proposed regulations on this bill and creating guidance for industry and all the educational materials that you can find on the Maryland Department of Environment's website. But we also know that for a lot of these issues, local community efforts are key. And speak to those aspects, we have Ava Richardson, who is director of the Baltimore Office of Sustainability from the Department of Planning. And we're going to hear more during the second part from her about local issues that she's been a driving and key player in Baltimore City to educate community members on the value of compost and food waste reduction. So to get us started, though, we're going to hear from Shannon and Tim. Can you guys explain to us what food residuals are, and then give everyone an overview of what the new food residuals law involves?
Hello, hopefully you can hear me. If not, I'll speak in my regular voice, which also I'm originally from New Jersey, so you should be able to hear me from the back as well. My name is Shannon McDonald. Tim Kerr and I are the two individuals responsible for providing education and outreach at the state of Maryland, throughout the state of Maryland on the food residuals law. We are also compliance and enforcement. So we are holding many caps for this. Okay. So the law is actually, the law was passed both in the House and in the Senate. So there are two bills, but we affectionately call it 264 in the state. You can look these laws up online. They are very condensed and tight. And so therefore the regulations, the proposed regulations that are out there right now provide a lot more information relative to it. But generally the law states if you produce food residuals and those food residuals can no longer go to landfill incineration. There are caveats to that, but the law was passed in 2021 and it goes into effect January 1st of this year for those that produce 2 tons or more each week of food residuals, and then the threshold drops down to 1 ton each week the following year. There are other caveats within it, but generally that's what this is for. You produce food residuals and 2 tons a week and 1 ton a week. It can't go to landfill incineration anymore. Well, I'm probably staring at a bunch of lawyers. So the law defines that food residuals are those that are both pre and post consumer food waste. So it isn't just back of house materials, but it is also at the front end as well. Those are lots of materials that can be sent to landfill incineration. And that's why we call this the food residuals law as well, because it's not just the back end side of it. In other states throughout the nation where there are food diversion laws, those can sometimes they've identified them as just the back of house food residuals. A person under the law is anyone that produces food residuals, but we do have a few exceptions, and they are and no restaurants in the state are considered those that are required to meet this food diversion law, and the aggregate of all the county school systems. So the entirety of Anne Arundel County is a county school system, does not become one entity or one person, but an individual school would. So there are at least 6 schools in this state that are in the top 1% of school sizes in the nation, as far as the number of individuals in a public school. So PG County has one of the largest middle schools. Baltimore County, no, PG's is high school, Anne Arundel's is middle, and Baltimore's is high. So we've got some pretty large schools in this state, and so they may over time be needing to meet the requirement of diversion. The map up here are potential persons under this law, and I say that because, as I said, there are nuances within this, but if you see, it's not just on the 95 corridor, though obviously the density of these blue dots would indicate that state, but you can look along those areas. And as Devin had shown earlier with the environmental justice mapping, not having that food being sent to landfill incineration in areas that potentially have those high levels of environmental justice, you can see on this map, we could potentially divert a lot of that waste from those areas. So again, who's potentially impacted? Large food producers, hospitals, schools, stadiums. There are a lot of categories in the law that are called out. So those include things such as the hospitals, the nursing homes, assisted living facilities, but then they also don't call out everything. So we have to look at this broadly and say, do you produce food residuals? And you're not a restaurant and you're not the aggregate school system. Now let's figure out how much food you're producing. It's also going to be impacting those recovering facilities, because we are intending, not only are you going to be source reducing the food, but if it's food for people, could it be sent to people again? I mean, that's what it was intended for. So let's get that food to people and offset the food insecurity numbers. Then also food recyclers. So anaerobic digestion, composting, and if there is a potential for feed for animal, then of course we would like to have that option or opportunity sent. So that might be from breweries as well. And of course, education, because we are hoping that if we can start it down low, we can teach the next generation to figure out better sustainability options for food waste. For agricultural impacts, we know that the compost has a greater, it offers more nutrient capacity, it has a better soil structure, and therefore it creates a better agricultural impact. And as I said, the opportunity for food for livestock, whether it is coming from a brewery or a distillery, those are options for feed that would otherwise be sent to landfill incineration. The Washington state has been doing food diversion laws since the 1980s. A large percent, over I think it's 1.5 million tons of distillery waste has been sent to livestock for use. So that's just one category of a large food producer that is directly impacting the requirements, but also agricultural needs. the motivation in the law. We thank you very much for sharing that, food insecurity is a major issue in the state. By providing that there is a potential for food that could have been used for people will still get returned to people is a major component within this law. The reduction of greenhouse gases that are created when they're in landfills and incineration, the reduction of that, and then that potential that could be captured and used as a natural fuel as well is a really strong component within this bill or this law. We are running out of landfill space for in the state. And so by cutting down on the percentage of material that could otherwise be used in a way, whether it is recovery, recycle, or reduction, we are going to sustain our state much longer. So the options for diversion, we follow the same EPA hierarchy as well. Can we reduce the wasted food? Can we look and see how much food should not be sent to landfill incineration? And because maybe it doesn't need to be purchased in the manner that it was, maybe there's a better opportunity for a sustainable product as well. Can we send food to people? Could we send it for livestock? Could we recycle it in anaerobic digestion or composting? Because we really are trying to avoid that landfill and incineration. So as I shared before, our role in this is the education and outreach and compliance and enforcement. This map up on here is a map that we've created that illustrates the number of the permitted composting facilities within the state that can receive food waste, as well as one of the larger anaerobic digesters that just came online in Jessup. And then the pinkish lavender bubbles are permitted facilities in other states that surround Maryland where there's an opportunity to potentially divert to. This map does not say you must divert to these places. This map does not tell you that they are willing and capable to accept it. And that's that big caveat within the law. So I did jump over this and I apologize. So basically on top of being a food producer and the threshold of the tonnage that you create, you have to be within an area that is within 30 miles of an organics recycling facility, such as these permitted facilities here, that is willing and capable to take your food residuals. You are not required to send your materials there. You're not required to create a contract with them. They just have to be willing and capable of receiving that material, and then the diversion requirement kicks in. So it's a bit of a nuance within it, and we got a lot of questions about it. And hopefully in our proposed regulations, we give a little bit more of a direct explanation on that. But we're always willing to hear more feedback. These lovely QR codes up here direct you to our MDE website, but also a link for a form for you to learn more information. Their paper on the tables is just a link to the website, and you can sign up on there as well. Here's our contact information, and I look forward to having a lively discussion after this. Okay.
Thank you, Shannon. So I wanted to pause and ask a question of you guys so you can answer. In your presentation, I don't know if you mentioned this in detail, but there is a waiver available as part of the proposed regulations in the program that if the recycling or composting facility within the 30-mile radius is not able to accept and process their food residuals, then they could basically qualify for a waiver from the requirements. Do you think that waiver opportunity is a big loophole that could reduce the effectiveness of the law? Everybody.
Hello. The purpose of the waiver in the law was to account for the situation where if you are one of the persons under the law and you are currently sending your food waste to landfill or to incinerator, if in the process of separating your food waste and having it hauled to an organics recycler like a composter, if the cost to do that is 10% more than the cost was when you were sending it to the landfill, you can apply for a waiver to MDE. The waiver is not needed if you are a person creating food residuals and you are contacting your local composter and they say, we can't take your food residuals. So they're unwilling to take your food residuals. Under the law, that means you are not required to divert to organics recycling facilities. So there will be no need to have a waiver. The waiver is only for businesses that under the law are required to divert their food waste, but the cost is 10% more than what they were doing when they were sending it to landfill. There's also another part of the waiver where if you have other conditions that come up where it's just not possible to divert your food waste for some reason, some other circumstance not having to do with finance, you could also apply for a waiver and we would look at those individual circumstances. But we don't view it as a loophole to get out of the law as far as if you are not required to divert already, you don't need a waiver. Waiver is only for people who are required to divert and the cost is just 10% more than what they were diverting before to a landfill.
Thank you.
So in addition to that, I want to highlight just how major of a deal it was that HB 264 passed. It took a couple of years within the legislature to get the bill passed, and it represents a major cultural shift in how we will manage waste across our state. So I think the fact that the bill passed and we're coming up on implementation was significant for bringing our waste management system across the state into a more modern, smarter way and approach to better manage our natural resources. And so definitely there's different considerations for various sizes of businesses and kind of all the caveats that may come in and challenges that businesses may encounter when complying with the law. So I didn't see it as necessarily a loophole, but more so a consideration where you have to factor these different challenges that come into play when you actually get to implementing and enforcing any legislation or law. So as someone from local government, I was really excited that it could potentially be an opportunity to really expand the capacity and the infrastructure for food waste reduction across our city and further contextualize how we're approaching food waste across the state of Maryland. So often we talk about compost because it's sexy, right? But we're not talking about food rescue enough, and we're not talking about food waste prevention. How much food went to waste during today's lunch? How many people actually consumed all of the food that was out there? How many boxes were left that probably will either go in the trash, but likely won't be consumed by a person and perhaps not an animal either. So I think it's really opening up a chance for us to think about the culture of our consumer patterns and significantly change them. So it's definitely going to be a process though. But.
Thank you. Yeah, and from what we've heard before is like people are actually interested. They're not looking for ways out of complying. They're looking for ways to participate in the solution, right? All right, so this is a great opportunity and time to switch gears from the state program to hear more about Baltimore City and what efforts that you have been doing in Baltimore to increase community engagement.
And we're going to start with a video about community composting in the city. Whenever you're ready.
How do I work towards a future where people can grow really healthful food in ways that's beneficial to the environment, but also benefit from the production of that food and use it to feed themselves and to feed their families and to feed their communities. Food is this kind of core tenet of everybody's lives, and really so much of what we interact with revolves around food. food is actually not only related to health, but it's also one of the kind of biggest environmental drivers and one of the biggest things that kind of shapes our environment. Food waste is actually the largest material in our landfills in the US. Preventing that food waste from happening in the first place is actually where we will get the most environmental benefit. Baltimore has taken an amazing approach, which is, engage community partners, engage residents, and engage them at different points throughout their day.
There used to be buildings here before this became White Rock Community Farm.
My name is Marvin Hayes. I'm the youth program manager for the Baltimore Compost Collective. We are a youth-led food scrap collection service. We have 77 customers in Federal Hill, Riverside, Locust Point, Curtis Bay, Brooklyn. NRDC and the Rockefeller Foundation have been able to support us to make us a model for composting for Baltimore City, for other community gardens to learn that they can divert their food scraps and turn it into compost soil enhancer. We had 3 incinerators. Baltimore City has one of the highest asthma rates in the country. So we have a great opportunity to educate the affected people in this community. I train youth on the art of small-scale composting and run this food scrap collection service, bring the food scraps back to Filbert Street Garden, process it, and make it into black gold. Filbert Street Garden, which I like to call the Wakanda of South Baltimore. We don't make vibranium, but we do make leaf gold, compost, black gold.
In our 2019 sustainability plan, the city committed to reducing food waste by 50% by 2030. And in our recovery strategy, we actually committed to reducing residential waste by 80% in the next 20 years. When we began our partnership with NRDC, it really catalyzed the efforts that we were doing regarding food waste across the city. Everything from the funding to the subject matter expertise that they were providing really ensure that we have the resources to implement these programs effectively. We collect food scraps at the farmers markets on Saturdays and Sundays. The farmers fill up their trucks with the food scraps and take it back to their farm. So we don't have to pay a hauler. It's just a way to be creative, and it kind of really represents the ingenuity of Baltimore. We are also working with NRDC to launch a network of community composting sites across the city. These sites will be critical and key to ensuring that residents have access.
White Rock Community Farm is a farm that allows the community access. You'll notice throughout the day that you'll see folks that'll come by and stop by and help out. We used to have the old-fashioned chicken wire kind of compost system, and it was here on the main lot. With the funding, we were allowed to purchase the kits and the materials in order to build the 3-bin compost system. We're all one group as the Farm Alliance of Baltimore, and we all have urban farms, and we work together.
Yeah, this is a tough neighborhood. It has the lowest rates of employment, the highest number of vacant homes. These lots were all houses that had gotten raised in the 90s. Most of these open fields were just dumps. It was all types of trash, tires, bathtubs, everything. And so when the farm was here, all of this got cleaned up.
If you're turning a vacant lot into green space, growing food or places for composting, and you're removing litter and dumping from your community, you're getting that engagement from the community and the interest in participating.
Baltimore showed just amazing leadership. We have a network of cities around the US that are working on food waste, that are motivated to do this work. You're not alone. There are so many other people that are excited about this, and you can count on them.
Learn so you don't have to burn. Starve the incinerator, feed the soil, feed the community.
Right.
one other quote my friend and colleague Marvin Hayes often uses that wasn't in the video is a rind is a terrible thing to waste. So with that, we'll get into the presentation. Thank you so much for having us here this afternoon. Really excited to sharing some of the things that we're doing in Baltimore City regarding wasted food. My name is Ava Richardson. I am the Sustainability Director for the city. And I had the real pleasure and honor of working with the Natural Resources Defense Council for a 2-year period, actually going on 3 years now, to do a deep dive on food waste. And during that time, we were able to really just think more comprehensively about how we're addressing wasted food across the city, looking at prevention, looking at food rescue, as well as food scrap recycling, which included considerations for upcycling foods, but also traditional kind of like composting and anaerobic digestion. We were able to launch several initiatives and projects, some of which are still continuing today, others which kind of ebbed and flowed during the pandemic. And so we launched food scrap collection at our farmers market, where farmers take, two farmers, Albright Farms and Paul's Farms, they take those food scraps back to their farms, and Paul's is feeding it to their hogs. There's a video in the Baltimore Sun about it. Check it out. We really appreciate that partnership and the fact that she's using that food for higher use, feeding animals, and sells that product at the farmers market is really, really great. We also launched the Baltimore Food Waste Reduction Working Group that currently meets quarterly to inform folks on some of the food waste initiatives and coordination that we're doing across the city. We worked with the Maryland Food Bank to enhance and expand food rescue opportunities across the city, and learned quite a bit from that whole process. Talk a little bit more about food rescue and kind of like some of the challenges there. And we also launched a host of educational materials. Some of them are featured here. The posters you see in the top, I guess your top left, are actually a series, educational series related to food waste and how we try to really frame and connect food waste to so many other issues. We really view the issue of wasted food as a food systems challenge, not just a challenge related to waste, not just a challenge related to greenhouse gas emissions, but looking at that interconnection between our soil health needed to sustain a healthy and resilient food system, thinking again about the equity implications of a waste management system that does not put people and planet first, and then also thinking about the very clear environmental connections. As was mentioned in the video, we get the most return on investment for our food waste efforts when we prevent it from ever happening, right? So an example for that today would have been preparing fewer box lunches to ensure that food isn't put out that won't be consumed based on whatever numbers of folks that you may have confirmed. That is really hard to do because you can't measure what you don't generate. And so when I said compost is sexy, that's been kind of one of our biggest challenges, because preventing waste is not nearly as interesting and intriguing and engaging an activity for restaurants, for consumers. But we put together this food waste guide to educate folks in their homes about what it is that they can do in order to reduce wasted food. Obviously, date labeling and understanding, or just kind of planning meals and things like that, are great ways to reduce wasted food in our homes. And I think what we really need is just like more people obsessed with wasted food or the elimination of it. I work with some great people, but we might come off as a little crazy sometimes because we're all just like, really interested in driving down that organic waste material and just thinking more comprehensively about how we circularize different aspects of our waste stream in general, knowing that organic material, particularly food, is a huge portion of that. We also had the opportunity to work with our health department to train health inspectors on how they can be informing restaurants of what they can do to reduce wasted food when they're going out and doing the inspection. That is an initiative that was supported and happened in several different cities. As was mentioned in the video, NRDC supported a national collaborative amongst different cities that were focused on food waste reduction. And again, we have these different educational materials that we created to raise awareness about the issue amongst our residents. So I mentioned some of our goals and our plan, and we also work really closely with our Department of Public Works. And they have some specific goals about addressing wasted food or food waste diversion in their Less Waste, Better Baltimore plan. But this particular initiative really depended heavily on cross-agency collaboration within city government, working with, as I mentioned, Public Works, our Office of Promotion in Arts, in addition to some of our other agencies, such as our Department of Parks and Rec, as well as other agencies and partners across the city that really helped us to launch and keep some of this programming going. So where the program stands, where in terms of the program, it had initially launched in kind of like 2018. And then in 2020, we institutionalized it. So it launched within our Office of Sustainability. And in 2020, we transitioned it over to our Department of Public Works. That is a common practice for the Office of Sustainability in the city. We pilot a lot of initiatives in our office and then give them over to agencies to steward and manage them, because we're a small team that doesn't have the resources to do it. So right now, the Department of Public Works is leading this effort, leading this initiative, managing food scrap collection sites across the city, including our farmers market-based sites. And also we work really closely with them to support education, outreach, and engagement to continue to raise awareness about the issues. This data just reflects kind of where we were in 2020, 2021, when it came to food scrap collection at our 5 citizen drop-off locations across the city. The really tall line that you see is just one location that has more foot traffic, but it lets us know that we have to have like drop-off locations that are central. This is a location that's in a residential community. It's the one that's easiest to access. And so we have to look at some of the other locations and really think about how we more strategically place them in in places that are much more easy to access. But we see an increase year over year for most of these sites across the city. And overall, we've collected 75,000 pounds of food scraps, but we know that's only a fraction of what's actually being produced in the city. We've also been hosting our DPW, our Department of Public Works. They've been hosting composting workshops across the city. Also different demonstrations with partners like Marvin Hayes and other community composters in the city to ensure that people can kind of have like a more connection and closer relationship and understanding with what it is that we're trying to do in the value of generating compost and that soil amendment. I think so much of what we are trying to do hinges on behavior change. It hinges on millions of behaviors that millions of Marylanders make every day across the state, in Baltimore City residents as well. And so we're really trying to get down to some of the psychology of why it is that we waste food, why it is that that is culturally okay and culturally acceptable, and what that means for how we try to address that, particularly in our schools and K through 12 schools as kids are coming up, but that's a whole nother issue. So some of our successes, again, we've really enhanced just how we work with our agencies across the city and how well we collaborate together on different issues and sharing resources. Our public works folks, we are able to put in joint grants with them, and whenever problems come up, we're communicating and working strategically to address them. So much more collaboration that's taking place now, and we've really unsiloed so much of this work. And so it's been a really worthwhile process to engage in that work. And then we also have different other agencies that are getting more and more involved and more interested. The city does have 11 urban farms that it manages, which are community garden plots that different people manage. They can pay to manage those plots during the season. And we're trying to figure out how we more strategically support those sites with community composting, since they already have like a very dedicated following of folks. And when we think about like
who's the low hanging fruit, right? So when we think about the folks who are dropping off their food scraps at the farmer's market or at the resident drop-off centers. Now, those are really good people to get them to think like moving up the hierarchy, the food waste hierarchy, and thinking about prevention, thinking about how they're preventing wasted food in other ways. And then folks who are supporting other efforts, like again, thinking about what are some of the other, what's some of the other work that they can be doing. I will say that initially, we didn't have like a lot of racial diversity when it came to who was dropping off food scraps, and that has really changed over time. And so we're very much challenging the narrative around like who's interested and cares about the environment, and making sure that the narrative of like lower income populations of color not caring as much is not something that we tolerate at all. Because especially when we think of from an environmental justice perspective, who's bearing the environmental burden of our waste management system, as we have an incinerator and a landfill in South Baltimore, and predominantly African-American low-income community. In terms of some of our lessons learned, I think during the pandemic, it for all of us highlighted a lot of vulnerabilities and the lack of resilience in certain systems, especially our food system. A lot of our community composting efforts just fell short, especially given the need to social distance. And we really haven't been able to get a lot of sites back on track after that. And so we're realizing that we have to have more dedicated staff to support some of those efforts. We've had some challenges with our farmers market drop-off programs, more so just the staffing needed to be there. Sometimes that just ensuring that we have dedicated staff, that's kind of been one of the biggest lessons learned. So much of this work was grant funded. We were really fortunate to have around $500,000 of support from NRDC. And again, institutionalizing this and ensuring that we continue to support these efforts across the city, that means having a budget for it. That means having a line item. And that's been a real challenge. And we're working on finding grants and other ways to support it. It's whenever there's a limited number of resources or dedicated personnel, we'll continue to run into those challenges. And then also, as I mentioned, I think there's this kind of like cultural challenge when it comes to that behavior change that we need to see both at the residential level, but also within different industries, within grocery stores and among food systems workers. And I think it should be acknowledged that for many of the labor force that's expected to implement these changes are often in low wage jobs and oftentimes aren't treated well. And so when it comes to what that means and what it looks like to implement these changes on the ground, what does it mean to ensure that we're providing jobs with dignity for people who are supporting food scrap collection, people who are supporting composting? And so much of that work, as we've seen it so far, has either been underpaid or volunteered. And we need to have more high paid positions to support people in that way. And so how it's going. I actually I had the pleasure of testifying for a different iteration of the organic residuals bill the year prior to it passing. But we are happy to have contributed to some of that progress. The city's Department of Public Works will actually be hiring a zero waste manager who will be supporting and stewarding a lot of the work that has happened so far and really helping us to, again, further institutionalize some of the work that we started under the Food Matters program within city government. We are working really closely with the state, and I just want to appreciate and thank my state partners for answering questions and being there. Really appreciate them, but to ensure that we understand what businesses need to do in order to be in compliance, and understand the expectations for local governments as well, and making sure that our health department is well aware of that. We've incorporated composting and other food waste education distribution and things of that nature into various other events that happen across the city.
we're at our farmers markets on the weekend, and one of them is year round. So we're able to do a lot of education and engagement, not just on wasted food, but again, on other topics across the Office of Sustainability and that impact climate change. And we're also working with some communities in South Baltimore to explore what it looks like to expand food scrap recycling or food waste infrastructure. A lot of that kind of hinges on or focuses on a composting facility. We don't know what the future of that will be just yet, but we are exploring what the possibilities are. Just last year, a large $15 million research grant was funded by the national, by NSF, National Science Foundation, to support food systems research focused on food waste. That was funded. American University received that grant, and it was really an exciting project. It's called Multi-Scales Recipes. It includes 40 different researchers from 11 institutions who are those people obsessed with food waste and looking at it from all different levels and researching it across the city. And I think that particular research project is going to provide a lot of insights to inform state, local, and federal governments on some of the practices or the approaches that are going to give us the most return on investment as it relates to wasted food. And that is it. I look forward to any questions that anyone has.
Thank you, Ava. That was great. So I have one question for all of you before we open up and for the internet and the audience to ask some questions. My question is, the last one that I prepared, I'm going to go and skip to the end. We talked about the potential for the state program to create a sort of food scrap or residuals exchange or marketplace, similar to what food banks have in place oftentimes. What are all of your thoughts on setting up something like that to help facilitate the implementation of the state law? And who should be in charge of setting that kind of thing up? Would it be the state or would it be the local governments?
So one of the things that we've been looking at the state as we've been meeting with all the stakeholders that are generally involved. So that is not just the food producers, but again, the composters, and talking with a variety of different research programs and the food recovery programs to figure out what's the best opportunity to shifting the food. So whether it's recovery or for end donation, the marketplace on that end. And one of the most valuable assets we think that will keep progressing with this, the food diversion law, is the opportunity for smaller anaerobic digestion facilities staggered around the state. So we can capitalize on the increased methane production when it integrates with manure, because it's a short, from what we've learned from a variety of research, that is a shorter return on investment and production of methane when food is integrated with manure. And when you do that at a small scale, staggered around the state with agricultural land, and then also in communities where coal production is down and we have restoration facilities, whether it's mining or no longer in use brownfields, there are opportunities for growth to mitigate where our waste is going and producing materials that are renewable and long-term resources.
Yes, and where are my improv people at? So I think we need that. We need the markets, and agree with everything Shannon said, but I think we need those markets and something facilitating and driving those businesses, in addition to 100 other different programs, looking at ways to reduce, prevent, reduce, and divert our organic waste. And so I think there's so many options for solutions here, and many of them are market-based. Others, again, are going to be based on what we do, again, in our homes every day, and even thinking like before you go to the grocery store, that's kind of when you prevent the food waste, right? Making your list, planning out a meal, not cooking more than you need. So I think definitely we need those market-based solutions. We have to develop that market. And I think what that really does is kind of helps level set like, this is very valuable material that we want people to compete for, because we want to put those nutrients back in our soil, and we want those nutrients to support a sustainable and resilient food system. So yes, and so many other things.
We also talked to food banks and other food pantries about food donation, because we think that's a big part of the program as well. We are hoping that with this law in place, that donations to food banks and food pantries will go up, and that will help with food insecurity. One of the issues we're doing now is we're trying to coordinate with the Maryland Food Bank and the Capital Area Food Bank, and using them as sort of a conduit to see if we can find distribution networks out to local pantries and local churches and things like that. So there's a lot more involved than you would think in that, but that is one of the main areas of our work right now, is trying to set up those connections. So if you are a business that, even if you don't have to divert under the law, but you have excess food that is still good, still edible, that it can be used instead of discarded. And so that's a big part now, is trying to connect all of these resources to generators, food generators that will have food available for them.
So this law is in place for these large food waste generators, right? Like that's the top of this, is divert that. But this touches upon so many different programs. As Ava mentioned, it's the community-based opportunities. If we have a composting facility that's large scale that municipal can divert from, or if we have urban locations where a community could bring their materials to for a small urban agricultural facility. There's so many different hub and spoke options that can happen from food diversion. And really, now that we've got the large food generators doing this, how many people work at these facilities? How many of them are going to be impacted by this that will now take this home with them? One of the pieces of our outreach is with the public schools, because they're kind of called out within this law. Universities are called out within this law. So now we're hitting that younger demographic as we move our way up. So it's going to be pushed down from both ends, and we're hoping that it just spreads out through the entirety of the state. I also wanted to call out that we're the first state in our environmental region that has a food law. So the Northeast has them on the books already. The West Coast has them on the books. We're the only ones in EPA Region 3 that has this law on the books, and it comes into effect January 1st. So we're going to see a big shift change in this region.
Thank you. So the question we have, Right, well, I'll start with the first one. We've only got a few minutes left here. So the first question that came in was about do we know how much food waste going to landfills is actually from households versus large generators? And the person's question is really concerned is, do we have an idea of whether or not there's going to be a significant amount of waste going with the regulations? Is there still going to be a significant amount of waste going to landfills from households versus large generators?
Yeah, the bill just addresses businesses and institutions, so it doesn't address any residential households. So there's a possibility that there will still be waste going to landfills from residentials, but right now the focus is on large generators and education and outreach also, to try to educate the public about food waste so that they can exercise strategies in their own houses to try to reduce the amount of food waste they produce. I have a backyard compost bin, for instance. That's where I put all my food waste right now. So if that's practical, if some communities do have curbside pickup of food waste, But that's not covered by Maryland's law right now. Maryland's law right now just deals with businesses and institutions, but there is opportunities.
Yeah, and so, yeah, nationally, roughly 40% of food wasted is produced at the consumer-facing level. Roughly half of that is on the commercial side in terms of restaurants and grocery stores, and the other half is generally residential. This can vary depending on your particular locality, the density, the population density, and the number of restaurants or grocery stores for that matter. So it probably fluctuates depending on your jurisdiction in Maryland, but we know it's a good amount. It's a lot. In terms of what would still be coming from the residential level, I think jurisdictions are working to expand some of the options for their residents, but the reality is that every jurisdiction or county, local government, they do things a little bit differently. And so I think until there is maybe something that's more comprehensive, such as an organics ban on landfills, the additional step to really decrease or drive down organic waste at the consumer facing levels, including both residential and commercial, it will require more effort, more work. I do believe this bill is still going to encourage more of that activity, especially with the new, if there's new like composting sites and new infrastructure to manage organic or waste or food waste. So yes, it will. I believe it will have an impact, but we'll have to wait and see what the data say. But generally, these laws actually lead to a lot more activity and a lot more diversion. So.
Great. Thank you. I see we have questions from the audience, and unfortunately we are at time. I think our speakers will be available after if we need to approach. But thank you, Ava. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Tim, for your time. And thank you everyone in the audience for sticking around with us as we finish.